Just recently, you had the Indian space policy that was approved by the Indian government. Now, this policy seeks to institutionalize and facilitate the access of private sector participation in the space sector in the country. My colleague Aishwarya Patil connected with Mr. Pawan Goenka, the chairperson of IN-SPACe, to understand the new space policy and the exciting new world of the Indian tech space startups. Let's hear out a slice of that conversation.
Well, the fact that you can make a call, browse the internet, or even watch a live broadcast of ET Now, it's all thanks to the Indian Space Research Organization and India's space mission. With the unveiling of the new space policy, India will now witness private players, especially Indian space tech startups, entering this space and stepping up their skin in the game. To talk to us about the new space policy and the exciting new world of Indian space tech startups, we have with us Mr. Pawan Goenka, chairperson of IN-SPACe. First, sir, take us through what the key highlights of the new space policy are and how it will allow private players to step up their game in the space sector.
Well, thank you for having this program. I think it's very important to understand the background that has led to the new space policy. It's really part of a bigger vision of Government of India to open up the space sector to the private sector for two purposes. One is the economic value that it can create for the country, and I'll come to that. And second is the social benefit or societal benefit that the opening up of space will bring to the general public in India. And the policy is just one of the several things that have been done by government in the last 2 to 3 years to make that happen. Now, the new space policy, as you said, does open up the whole space sector for the private sector, which up until recently was off limits for private sector, and everything was necessarily done by ISRO. ISRO is very much part of the future of space, but private sector will be a co-traveler in the journey of the new space in India. And that's what the policy aims. What the policy does, in effect, is open up the full space sector, every aspect of space sector, to the private sector in India. For example, the private sector can now build rockets, build satellites, it can launch its own rockets, it can operate space assets, it can deliver commercial services, it can own technology, it can do Earth observation data, anything it wants, private sector can play, right? And we will transfer the ISRO technology to the private sector. The process already started. So the private sector doesn't have to start ground up. What ISRO has done up until now in the last 50, 60 years, that becomes a starting point for the private sector. And that's a big benefit that the private sector will have in India. Now, what will it lead to? Today, as you said, that the space economy in India is only about $8 to $10 billion out of $450 billion global space economy, which for a country like India, that really is fairly advanced in terms of space technology and space infrastructure, probably amongst the top 5, 6 in the world. I think it's a very small number. So one thing that it will do is take us from the $8 to $10 billion to, let's say, $40, $50 billion in the next 8 to 10 years. That will be our aspiration on how do we bring private sector to play in the space economy and move the space economy from 8 to 40, let's say. The second part that will do is the real benefit of this space comes from Earth observation data. That means all the photographs that we can take from space, all the data that we can collect, and how do we translate that data for use of civil society? For example, farmers, how they would know about weather, how they will know about soil condition, how will they know about any natural disaster. For fishermen, how do they know where to go and fish? For urban planning, for infrastructure planning, for railways, all of these things. How do we translate this space data for use of common man? And that will be the big benefit that will come, even bigger than the economic value addition that will happen. The big benefit that will come with private sector's participation in space. ISRO is doing all of these things today, but a lot of it is not reaching the last mile. And that's where the private sector has to come in and take it to the last mile so that we are able to get full benefit of what space can do for us and leverage everything about space for a day-to-day operation.
Well, agri-tech is just one piece of the pie. Could you take us through, the other sectors that we could see flourishing in the next few years?
So Earth observation was one sort of sector in space that is obvious to us. The second sector is communication, the whole satellite communication, where of course we everything that we see today, the television broadcasting, all that happens through space satellite. But more and more of communication happening through satellite broadband is something that India is lacking in today. And what we are hoping is that we'll be able to bring satellite broadband into India in the next 3 to 5 years, using many of the existing players outside India or emerging players outside India, such as Starlink, Amazon, OneWeb, Telenet. There are many such services that are beginning to come up now that we'll be looking at under the new policy.
All right, common people will be the end beneficiaries of the new space policy opening up to private players. But let's shift focus back now to IN-SPACe. You're the chairperson of IN-SPACe. Tell us what the role of IN-SPACe is and, in sort of incubating the space tech startup, what is the process that you follow?
So Earth observation was one sort of sector in space that is obvious to us. The second sector is communication, the whole satellite communication, where of course we everything that we see today, the television broadcasting, all that happens through space satellite. But more and more of communication happening through satellite broadband is something that India is lacking in today. And what we are hoping is that we'll be able to bring satellite broadband into in the next 3 to 5 years, using many of the existing players outside India or emerging players outside India, such as Starlink, Amazon, OneWeb, Telenet. There are many such services that are beginning to come up now that we'll be looking at under the new policy. And what IN-SPACe will do is to facilitate the private sector to come in. And when I say private sector to come in, there are at least 3 sets of players that we're talking about. The first set are the startups, the companies like Skyroot, Agnikul, Pixel, Digantra, Dhruv Space, all of these startups that are just beginning their journey, for them to get access to what ISRO has in terms of technology and infrastructure and facilitate their coming up in the space sector, which is beginning to happen already. You have seen some of the outcome through the launch of Skyroot. We recently had just last week a PSLV SC55 launch where we had 5 payloads coming from private sector for various things. So that's one part. Second part are the larger companies that have been existing in the space sector, but primarily as a vendor to ISRO. Now, for these companies to move up the value chain and start developing its own technology and owning space objects will be the second part. For example, we have the SSLV rocket that has been developed by ISRO recently. We are looking to see how the SSLV rocket can be transferred to a private sector, single company or a consortium of companies who will then be able to manufacture and launch these rockets. And the private sector can come in a big way. That when there are many other things that we're looking at right now, which is too premature to talk about.